And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing this front with some wind and rain, the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and then some light rain extending northward along this trough to the Pribilof Islands and may get into the southwest coast here tonight, extending up to St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, dry to the west, dry to the east from the Arctic coast into the Gulf of Alaska, on down the Panhandle. And that continues into tomorrow as well. Maybe a little bit better chance of some moisture up here over the northwest part of the state. And about the same here, some of this moisture edges inward from this trough here into western Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula. It stays kind of damp down across the Pribilof Islands, wet and windy for the the Alaska Peninsula here. Dry, light winds for the southeast coast, dry, light winds, sunshine here, central, interior, southward again. A few more clouds down Kodiak Island. Could see some clouds here over the southern Kenai Peninsula. And then for Friday, stronger low pressure, but not all that strong in the central Bering Sea here. So winds start to kick up in advance of this front along the southwest coast. Periods of rain continue for the Alaska Peninsula. Lighter amounts of wind and rain for the eastern Aleutians. And possible flurries there, eastern Arctic coast with that. Otherwise dry over the remainder of the state as high pressure holds there over the Copper River Basin and extends down the southeast coast. Coastal water forecast, east winds 15 knots on the south coast tomorrow. Central coast, east-southeast at 10. And the north coast, light east winds at 10 knots. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, Clarence Strait. North winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet. For Friday, north winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet for the inside waters. Northeast winds 15 knots for the south coast, and the north coast, north to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots. Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, northern Cook Inlet for tomorrow, variable winds at 10 knots with seas 2 to 4 feet. Southern Cook Inlet, northeast at 10. Barren Island, southeast at 15, and east winds 20 knots for Kamishak Bay. And for Friday, variable to northeast breeze at 10 knots for Cook Inlet. Light variable winds again for the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound with 2 to 3 foot seas. East winds 15 knots, Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Kodiak Island, east-northeast winds tomorrow, 20 to 25 knots. Small craft advisories here for the Alaska Peninsula. East winds, east and southeast winds at 30 knots in those areas, and southeast winds 30 knots for Bristol Bay. And for Friday, Bristol Bay, all the way down to Cape Sarachev, southeast winds 30 knots, seas 5 feet. Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, about the same, except seas a lot higher, running about 10 to 12 feet there. Kodiak Island, east winds at 20 knots. Eastern Aleutians, north to east winds 25 to 30 knots for the day on Thursday. Adak and Atka, north at 25, and northwest becoming southwest for the winds, 15 to 25 knots for the western Aleutians. And then for Friday, western Aleutians, northwest to west winds, 15 to 20 knots, southwest 20 here for Adak and Atka, seas around 7 feet. And the eastern Aleutians, west to southeast winds, 20 to 25 knots. The southwest coast here, southeast winds for tomorrow, 20 to 30 knots. Southeast 20, St. Lawrence Island, southeast 15 for Norton Sound. Same thing for St. Matthew Island, southeast winds 15 knots. Northeast at 15 for the Pribilofs. And for Friday, gale warnings here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Southeast 35 knots, seas 8 feet. Small craft advisories. Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Small crafts for the Pribilof, southeast at 25. East winds 30 knots, seas 11 feet for St. Matthew Island. And for the Chukchi Sea, tomorrow, south winds 25 to 30 knots, 5 to 7 foot seas. South 25 for the western Arctic coast, south 20 on the central coast, and south to southeast at 15 for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, seas at about 2 feet. And for Friday, west winds 30 knots, good for small craft advisories there for the eastern Arctic coast. Seas in ice-free waters 4 feet, northwest at 20 for the central coast, and much lighter on the west side here, northwest at 10. East to northeast winds 15 knots for the Chukchi Sea.